You've probably heard the story. Anne of Cleves was so hideous that Henry VIII took one look at her and decided he couldn't touch her. England's most notorious king supposedly called her the Flanders Mare, a big, ugly horse of a woman who ruined his appetite. For centuries, we've accepted it without question. Historians repeated it. TV dramas leaned into it. It's become one of those facts that's so ingrained. You can practically hear it in a schoolteacher's voice. But what if I told you it's all a lie? A carefully crafted smear designed to save a king's pride and humiliate an innocent woman. The real Anne of Cleves wasn't ugly at all, and the true story of why Henry hated her is far more embarrassing for him. I'm your host, Cloaked Testament, and this is the Time-Worn Record, where we deep dive into the most mysterious corners of history, unveiling the truths or myths that have been hidden or forgotten. What could possibly be hidden behind the curtain today? Let's rewind to late 1539. Henry VIII was no longer the chiseled, golden-haired warrior king, painted in the early portraits. He was pushing 50, weighed over 300 pounds, and was plagued by a festering ulcer on his leg that never healed. The stench of infection followed him everywhere. People claimed they could smell it rooms away. He was short-tempered, paranoid, and obsessed with being seen as the gallant, irresistible monarch he had once been. But England was isolated. Catholic superpowers like France and the Holy Roman Empire were threatening to crush him. He needed allies. Enter Anne of Cleves. Anne was a 24-year-old German princess from a strategically important duchy. A marriage to her could link England with powerful Protestant states in Germany, but Henry had never met her. Negotiations were handled by his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, and sealed with a portrait. Cromwell sent Henry's best artist, Hans Holbein, to paint Anne. Holbein was a master of realism. If a sitter had a mole, you saw the mole. If their nose was crooked, it stayed crooked. The image he brought back showed a young woman with light brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and an expression of calm dignity. Henry was pleased. In his mind, she was already his. And because Henry still fancied himself the hero of some romantic tale, he decided their first meeting would be magical. On New Year's Day, 1540, Anne arrived at Rochester Castle after a grueling winter journey across Europe. She was tired, cold, probably anxious, about marrying a man with a reputation for killing wives. As she stood at a window, she watched a violent spectacle unfamiliar to her English bull baiting. A chained bull surrounded by snarling dogs, snow-stained with blood. A crowd roaring for more. This was her introduction to England. Then the door burst open. Several men in matching cloaks strode in. One of them large, limping, and radiating the sour smell of decay, moved toward her. It was Henry in disguise. He had convinced himself that true love would make her recognize him instantly. He spoke to her in English, which she didn't understand, and tried to kiss her. Imagine the scene from Anne's perspective. A strange man with foul breath grabbing at you in a foreign castle. She did the only polite thing she could. She gently pushed him away and turned back to the window. For Henry, this wasn't just rejection. This was a mortal wound to his pride. In his mind, any woman worth having would swoon at his touch, disguise or no. He stormed out, humiliated. 20 minutes later, he reappeared in full regal attire, dripping in cloth of gold, and was formally announced as the King of England. Only then did Anne realize her mistake. And from that moment, Henry's opinion of her was poisoned. Not because of her looks, but because she had failed his absurd test. Thomas Cromwell, seeing the king's black mood, knew the marriage was in trouble. But the alliance was too important to abandon. So, Cromwell quietly fed the king's ego. Perhaps Holbein's portrait had been too flattering. Perhaps she wasn't quite as beautiful as expected. Courtiers who had met Anne and found her perfectly fine suddenly noticed flaws. Her nose was too long, her skin too dark, her clothing odd. The king's displeasure was contagious. On January 6th, the wedding took place at Greenwich Palace. Anne wore silver, her expression serene. Henry wore gold but looked like a man at his own funeral. During the feast, he barely spoke to her, his attention drifting to a vivacious 15-year-old in the crowd, Catherine Howard. That night, Henry failed to consummate the marriage. The next day, he told his physician he found Anne's body repulsive. He claimed her breasts sagged, her belly was loose, and she smelled bad. It was a public humiliation of the highest order, and it wasn't true. The likelier explanation? Henry was nearly 50, obese, possibly impotent, and nursing an ego still bruised from that first meeting. Anne, unaware of the depth of his resentment, tried to win him over. She learned English greetings. adopted English styles, and smiled whenever he appeared. But Henry was already obsessed with Catherine Howard. By spring, he wanted Anne gone. He offered her a choice fight the annulment and risk her life, or agree and walk away wealthy. Anne played it brilliantly. When questioned about the marriage, she claimed she thought kissing goodnight was all marriage required. Was she really that naive? Or was it a calculated performance to give Henry the excuse he needed? Historians still debate it. In July 1540, the annulment was finalized. The official reason? Non-consummation and a pre-contract from her youth that had long since been dissolved. The same day, Henry married Catherine Howard and had Cromwell executed. But unlike Cromwell, Anne was rewarded. Henry granted her multiple estates, an enormous income, and the honorary title of the king's beloved sister. She was free from the dangers of the royal bed, yet kept her position and wealth. While Catherine Howard endured court intrigue and the king's unpredictable moods, Anne enjoyed country estates, gardens, and lavish banquets. When Catherine was executed for adultery in 1542, Anne sent Henry a letter of condolence, perfectly polite, without a hint of gloating. She attended Henry's wedding to his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, dancing at the reception and showering the couple with gifts. She understood the delicate balance of staying close enough to remain untouchable, but never close enough to become a threat. The infamous Flanders Mare insult? It doesn't appear in any document from Henry's lifetime. It first appears in 1679, more than a century later, in a sensationalist history book. Every contemporary account describes Anne as respectable, pleasant, even attractive. Henry's own ambassadors confirmed Holbein's portrait was accurate. The women who served her described her as generous, clean, and kind. European princes even expressed interest in marrying her after the annulment. If she had been the hideous creature, Henry claimed, would any of this have happened? Anne lived another 17 years in England, never remarrying. She adapted to every political change, even switching religions when it meant survival. She became close to Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, who saw her as the one stepmother who never harmed them. When she died in 1557, she was buried in Westminster Abbey, a rare honor beneath a tomb that praised her as a most excellent princess. No mention of ugliness, no mention of Henry's lies, and yet the myth endured. For centuries, we believed the word of a narcissistic, wife-killing king over the truth. The recent restoration of Holbein's portrait peeled back centuries of grime and deliberate darkening, revealing a vibrant, dignified young woman. Not a beauty queen, not a monster, just a normal human being, who happened to outwit one of the most dangerous men in history. Anne's quiet victory was understanding that you can't beat a narcissist head-on. She let Henry think he'd won. She let him call her ugly. And then she lived exactly as she pleased, rich, free, and safe. When Henry died in 1547, bloated and rotting so badly that his coffin exploded, Anne was still alive, still hosting dinners, still beloved by those who knew her. History remembers Henry as the tyrant who destroyed wives. But Anne of Cleves, she's the one who got away.